Michelle Brody, PhD, an executive coach and clinical psychologist who brings 25 years of experience in both corporate and family settings to the challenging problem of conflict. She's worked with both global teams, complicated couples conflicts, polarized communities, and has deep expertise in what unlocks stuck dynamics. Michelle's first book, Stop the Fight, an illustrated guide for couples, has helped tens of thousands. Her latest book, Own the Armor, Revolutionary Change for Workplace Culture, helps companies to rapidly de-escalate conflict, isn't that wonderful, and rebuild healthy teams. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much. So good to be here with you.
Oh, it's so good to be here with you too. We were saying we haven't caught up in a long time, and this gives us a really great excuse to get together.
For sure.
And what a timely book. Are you prophetic or something?
Well, I'd love to hear why you think it's of the moment right now. I mean, I think it's
always been of the moment, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, conflict is something that's super hard in all arenas for everyone. And
I guess that's not new, is it, Michelle?
No, not so new.
Not so new.
For me, it's nice to be able to now focus my energy on more corporate conflict or conflict at work, when my previous stuff was about working with couples.
Yeah, that's one of my questions, actually, because your books did make a transition, right, from couples to office relationships. So tell me a little bit about those differences, and what do you mean by armor in the workplace?
Okay. Well, so I should step back and just say, like, where I come from in terms of my career. I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit between the corporate and psychology, let's say, more broadly. So first job was in investment banking. Then I went to grad school in clinical psychology when the corporate world wasn't the right thing. Then that focus, I did all sorts of work in psychology, but the part I liked the best was the interactional, working with couples, working with groups. Then I started to explore working in coaching. And at that point, I switched over, let the whole kind of at-home families and couples go. And I just started working in executive coaching exclusively. And then in 2009, when the recession happened and a lot of coaching work disappeared, I reopened a practice in couples. So then I was focusing very much exclusively on conflict in couples. Then the coaching work came back. Then I started doing more work in conflict at work, on teams and in pairs that were in high conflict at work. And now I'm doing both. So in a way, I feel like much of my work has always floated back and forth between people in difficult interactional moments in both home and at work. And so you can imagine that what I'll say in answer to your question is there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap. And if I think about, like, what's the core of conflict, like what's the core of the parallel, it's the things that cause conflict and the things that fix conflict are the same at both home and work. And it has to do with armor.
Wow. That's fascinating. So the things that cause conflict and the things that fix conflict are the same at home and work, and it has to do with armor. Okay, so tell us a bit more about that.
Okay. So if you think about what causes all the trouble when we're in conflict, it's typically that somebody has done something, either a coworker or a person at home has done something, and you feel hurt, you feel harmed, and as a result of that, you lose trust and you feel a sense of wariness about this person, and that causes you to put up some defenses. That's your armor, right? So something comes in that's hurtful, and as a result, you say, whoa, I need to protect myself. But the action of that protection is almost always perceived by the other person as something negative. Okay, so a colleague hurts me. I decide I'm going to ignore this person because I got to protect myself from them. They might experience that as being ignored, negative. They may then respond with some self-protective something, and then
their own armor
of a different type. Perhaps it's here's a good example at work. Someone loses their temper in the middle of a meeting, right? And they yell. The person yells. Someone else is affected by the yelling. They then go to HR and report the person for yelling. So if I think about, like, okay, what happened there? Somebody blew their top for some reason, reasonable, maybe not, but it has bad impact.
Right.
The other person then gets scared, goes to HR, reasonable, but has bad impact, because then that may begin something that causes more trouble for the person who yelled. The person who yelled then has more animosity towards the person who reported them. And then you're kind of stuck in this process. And of course, HR is looped in as well. That's when people armor up, that is where you land in conflict.
Wow.
And then you don't stop there. You start to label each other as a result of like, he's a yeller, she's an underminer. That causes that labeling, and the judgment then causes more threat, which then people have to respond to with more armor. And then that just keeps the whole thing going. So that happens at home, that happens at work. We are hardwired to respond to protect ourselves, but then that protection, it's like it's cold. Armor is cold. And as a result, the other person feels worse, usually threatened again, and we continue the cycle.
Yeah, it's almost like an arms race of armor. An armor race. Right?
Yeah.
As above, so below. There we go. We've got the same thing.
Exactly.
Well, you know, so these dynamics, I know your specialty as a coach is in guiding teams that have complicated dynamics, of which you're just explaining them, but you do get them to greater collaboration. Thank goodness. You know, what makes a dynamic so complicated today compared to the past? And what are the drivers of this dysfunctional behavior in teams, on teams in your experience? Is it what you're talking about here? Is there more to it?
Yeah, I think if you even the phrase what drives people to dysfunctional behavior, if you're thinking about that, I often think it's not just those people over there who have dysfunctional behavior, it's all of us have dysfunctional behavior.
No, ghosts don't even say it.
I mean, if you think about it, like that's the like I feel like one of the first insights about about turning this around is to say, I often think of it, any one of us will think about conflict as a linear thing. That person over there is doing something bad to me, and I want them to stop. That other person is the problem. But if we start sorting people into the good guys and the bad guys, that's the first problem. We have to think about it as we all have our best selves and our less optimal selves, our dysfunctional selves. That dysfunctional version of ourselves, which I often call the evil twin, comes out under threat. It comes out in me, it comes out in you, it comes out in everybody. And so typically conflict ends up being circular, right? Because it's always, I'm either in my regular self, but as soon as I flip into my less optimal self, you're going to as well. And we're going to end up having a conversation that's less optimal. And the goal is, of course, to return all parties to their optimal selves, which that's the key to getting out of conflict. I think to the question of whether these days things have gotten more complicated, dynamics have gotten more complicated, I think anything that adds more threat to an environment, to a home, to a workplace, is going to add to the dynamics because people will feel the need to respond to it. So anything you can imagine nowadays that makes life harder, a more chaotic home life that working from home, or just more economic pressure causes people to get nervous and potentially show more of their less functional selves.
Wow. I mean, how insightful, Michelle, to really understand that we each have this and we can each end up in this, right? In this vicious cycle as you're talking about. So how do you recommend people break down those defensive walls, build trust back, shift stuck mindsets, and change these vicious cycles? Is it, you call it owning your armor? Is that the key?
That is the key. Okay, so think about it. Imagine the walls are up, trust is low, and your mindset is somewhere stuck in, I don't like that person. That guy's a jerk. I'm right, she's wrong. That's a fixed mindset. So that's the state we have at the beginning of conflict. How do you move it? Think about what that would take to move from my wall is up to my wall is down. My trust is low, my trust is rising. My mindset is not totally negative about the other person. It's open to something more positive. Like that's a pretty big, dramatic change to reduce conflict. That's really hard to do. So I think of it as first job, we've got to get the walls down, right? In some ways, and they all sort of have to happen together. The walls have to come down, the trust has to rise, and the mindset has to change. So I think in some ways, you ever try to like get someone's defenses down? That doesn't really work too well.
Humor helps. My husband does it really well with
Humor,
humor. I can
humor
be so
helps.
mad at him when he makes me laugh, and I'm like, okay.
That that works. It doesn't. In a way, humor works because it goes around the back door.
It does.
It's
It kind of catches you like, wait, I'm laughing. How'd I get to laughing?
right. It's encountering like the real self. It's saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to connect to the real self. And by connecting to
Mm,
the real self, the armor can come down. So I think, of course, that's going to work a lot better than, could you stop being so defensive? Which never works, of course.
mm. Yeah, I've tried that one. It doesn't work. You're right.
It
Thanks,
doesn't
Michelle.
work.
I should have talked to you first.
So I think of it as I want to start on the mindset, because if I can move someone's mindset and see the situation differently, then they can start to let down their guard and begin to potentially open the door to more trust. So I think the first point to land is that this is not that the conflict is a cycle. If the conflict is linear, it's just little old me being great and that person over there is horrible. That's a linear cycle with one victim and one perpetrator. Then the change has to happen in the other person. And what control do I have over them?
Right.
If I think of it as a cycle, that there's something that I am doing that is contributing in some way. I may think it's smaller than the other person, and I may think it's not significant, but there is something that I'm doing that is contributing to this conflict, then I have some more power. The other part, the other second most important mindset shift is to say, uh, armor is the issue, not personality. Okay, so it's not like there's an evil person over there. What's over there is an armored person, and the job is not to change that person's personality. The like difficult coworker at work. I'm not trying to change their personality. I'm trying to help them shed their armor. So when I'm talking to clients about this, clients are in conflict. That's typically what I'll do is I'll say, let's just like look at this for a second. When did the person start acting in that way? Is there anything that you think triggered it? What could be involved? What happens? How do you react when the person over there is being awful? How do you react? That's what I'm trying to understand. What's your armor?
Right.
Right? When you can tell me, well, the way I react is that I just back channel. I don't deal with him. I just talk. I go around him. What do you think the impact of going around him is? Well, I don't know. Do you think there's any impact on him when you go around him? Well, I suppose it probably doesn't land with him very well. Huh. And when it doesn't land with him well, what do you think he does in response? Maybe that's why he actually also back channels. Yeah, sounds like he talks to your boss about it, and you both manage to talk to the boss instead of to each other, and that's what's going on there. So I help the person see that there is something that's happening on both sides. Both people are reacting to the other person's behavior, and then as a result, sending out negative vibes to the other side. So if I can land that it's a cycle, that there's armor, and then there's another real person, then we can try to figure out if we can only reach that real person who's behind the armor, we might be able to shift this. So once a person is already thinking, maybe I have some contribution here, and maybe they're responding to some trigger which is threatening them and causing them to get more armored. Now I'm interested in figuring out, can I get that armor down? So the key is really owning your own armor. And by the way you do that is by owning what is threatening me, how am I armoring up, and what's the impact that has on the other person, and then trying to understand that for the other side too. Once you get there, there's room. There becomes room to open up and see the conflict differently.
For sure. I love it because it's like practical compassion, right? Because I've had conversations with clients in conflict situations, and I'll help them see to have some compassion for that other person. That maybe, and I had, it helps when you have your own experiences. I remember being on a project where I was really upset with the project leader, and I really thought he was incompetent, frankly, which is sad to say. But he and pretty much the whole team felt this way. And we all just piled it on, like, oh, he's such a mess. He can't do anything. And I actually got coached, and I'm like, Maggie, put yourself in that person's shoes for a second. How easy is it for you to perform if everybody in the room thinks you can't do the job? And the next team meeting we had, and I saw that person, I felt so sad for that person, and that's how difficult that is. I could feel his pain, and I'm like, oh, and it totally changed how I interacted with him. I started supporting him and helping him be a success, as opposed to blaming him for all the issues that we had. And it was a come to Jesus kind of moment. I'll be honest,
Exactly.
it really
But
was big.
that's exactly, it's exactly the move that changes things.
Wow,
Exactly.
wow.
Right? When you're able to say, I could do something differently here to impact, in a way, you made that person less scared, and therefore they could perform their job better. So in some
Yeah, you had
ways,
an ally in the room instead of another
right,
detractor or dissenter or whatever the word
right,
is, right? Yeah.
exactly.
And it was amazing. I'm like, oh my goodness, I never want to be that again to someone else. And it would tell, we get caught up in dynamics, and, and like you said, we get hurt or scared, and then we put up our armor. But yeah, it really is. It's a beautiful thing when you let go of your armor. It was
Yes.
way more powerful to me to have that experience, for like, and I really got compassion for a fellow human being in that moment. And I thought it was really important. And you do this for leaders all the time, right? So you've coached and designed executive training programs, thank goodness. I'm sure for their sake too, I'm sure they're so happy to have you. And you've been in many industries: technology, manufacturing, nonprofits, so many others. What do you feel, Michelle, leaders need to understand most about creating a culture that allows people to, get out of their armor, work more productively together, trust each other again, all those things you're talking about? Can they do anything?
Well, look, I think the first thing to do is to assess how much, what are the threats that are actually causing people to put armor on. That's one thing a leader can do. If you're noticing you have a team that's very armored up, I think your question is not, why does everyone have all these dysfunctional behaviors? There's something wrong with all of them. A leader should step back and say, is there something that's threatening, that's causing this whole mess? And that threat could come from market factors, it could come from internal, interpersonal factors, and it can come from the leader themselves. So I think the first step is to ask some of those questions, to say, what is it that is threatening my team? And and if I can vacuum up some of that threat, I can, that's a first step to do, to say, okay, we just made an announcement that there might be layoffs in a couple of months. Well, boom, you have a totally threatening situation right now. And now you're seeing your team react to that threat. How do I make that announcement, or wait with that announcement, or modulate that announcement so that it doesn't have to make people spiral out of control? The other thing that a leader can do is be more vulnerable themselves, in the sense of not just like let it all hang out, be vulnerable, but to be displaying some curiosity about, and care about, what makes it harder for people to do their best, or what might be underneath someone's bad behavior. Typically a leader is going to spot bad behavior, and the most intuitive reaction to that is to offer feedback. See that behavior you're doing? Don't do it. Do something different. What if instead you ask, I'm noticing that this is a relatively new behavior. I haven't seen it in you before. Is there something that's causing it? It seems a little unusual for you. Is there something that's causing you to start interacting in this? Let's say the person's being more uh, grabbing for more credit. Be more public about how they were responsible for everything that went well, and or going into other people's lanes in terms of what their job description is. And a leader might say, stop doing that. Or they could say, is there something that's going on that's causing you to feel like you need to do that? What's happening? This is often a reason that people step out of their best selves and start to do something a little less optimal. So I think being sensitive to what those things might be, and being willing to ask those questions, is something a leader can be. And also to point to their own foibles, like noticing, I was just under more stress, and I just interacted with my team in a way that caused threat for them. I want to pull that back. How can I explain it to them? I can own my own armor. You know what? In that moment, I got really defensive, and I'm owning it. Or the behavior that I just showed you actually was not great for me. I'm going to pull that back, and I'm going to do something different. To be able to even say that is tremendous for followership.
Absolutely. I can tell you count the leaders that I respect and appreciate, and they're ones that do that, that own their, I didn't know it was, I love the phrase because it really makes sense, right? I love that framing of they own their armor. Because like you said, we can all slip into that. And when the leader can point to it and say, oh, wow, let me own that, it just models that behavior even better.
And
So, go
I would
ahead.
just add one thing to that,
Please,
actually,
yeah.
because this is not just own your bad behavior. It's specific that it's own your armor, because what that says is you're saying I'm owning that I did something that was self-protective in that moment. That wasn't just like a random thing, because if I can own the armor, the behavior, I'm also owning what caused it, right? Well, what happened? I can share. Here's what happened that caused it. Here was the threat I was responding to. This is how I reacted, and then also what my impact was, what I guess my impact was on others, and that's an important part of what owning your armor is about.
Awesome. Thank you for making a distinction. I have not finished the book. I don't think I got to that chapter yet. But
No problem.
I love it. I love the illustrations too, by the way. It's so fun. The way you present such a challenging topic. It's just really great. Okay, two last questions. You've been an invited speaker for corporate and community groups on topics related to collaboration, team collaboration. Can members of teams who aren't in a leadership position contribute to creating an improved work environment? And if so, how can they do that?
Okay, so I love this question because I, when the pandemic started and I started writing this book, I had like a good chunk of it written, and then I decided I made a mistake and I needed to redo the whole book. And the mistake was around this point. I had originally started writing the book as if it was for leaders, helping them helping them to deal with conflict on their teams. And then I started to feel like, wait a second, can't just be the leader's job. And I would rather change the book and make it one that where anyone on the team can begin a process on their team of changing the culture by noticing what armor needs to be owned in themselves and then having that propagate amongst other members of the team. So for example, let's say I'm speaking to someone on a team and they say to me, you know what's really ridiculous here? There's so much gossip on our team. It's like a junior high school. Everyone is, gossiping at each other. It like really causes people to, work less optimally, and I can't stand it. And I wish the leader would just hold people accountable. Like set some expectations and hold people accountable. I said, I agree. That's a good idea. However, there's something that can be done at every node, in every interaction that's happening on a team that changes the culture, beginning with when a team member comes to you and says, you're not going to believe what Joe said. I got to tell you this. This is incredible. Once again, Joe is doing his thing, and here it is. And you, like most of us, are a receptive audience for that. But you don't like gossip and you think it is eroding the team trust. So you, as a team member, in that moment can say, I really feel like this isn't helping us. I know I've listened to it in the past. I'm not blaming you, but I just feel like we should all do a better job of not passing this stuff around. It doesn't work. It doesn't help Joe. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help our leader. I really want to change this. That's something that you can begin from your side. You can also own your own armor from your side first. You can say, you know what, I realized something. You talk to one colleague that you have something to own with, and you can say, you know, we haven't had a great interaction. I feel bad about that. And I'm starting to realize that there's a bit of a cycle between us, and I want to own the part that's mine. I recognize that sometimes when you are coming to get work from me, I avoid you a little bit. And I do that because I'm either behind and I'm feeling nervous about it. And then I'm sure that makes you more frustrated, and it makes you want to come back and ask me for it again. And then I experience you as nagging me. And then that really is frustrating. And I move away even more. And I feel like there's this a little bit of a cycle going on between us. And you probably feel like you have to chase me down. That's not great. Does it look that way to you? I mean, you have if you're willing to do that as a team member, you engage your peer in a dialogue like that, you build trust. You then say to each other, do we want to do this with other members of the team? Do you think we could think about this and begin to change the culture. Because look, teams are systems. And the only way to change them is to begin to change at any node in the system is going to change other parts of it. So like you were describing, if you lessen the pressure on that leader, it was a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You lessen the pressure on that leader. You're one person acting as an ally. As soon as you lessen the pressure on the leader is going to behave differently. As soon as the leader behaves differently, other members of the team behave differently. And it grows and becomes a virtuous cycle. So that's the thing that is really becomes possible if you think about it in this different way. And that's what I find really exciting when I work with teams and I see them begin to like, one person's armor drops and the next person's armor drops and so on and so on. And you just feel like, okay, now we've got trust. Let's hold this. Let's use it and work together to make it not come back.
Wow, I love it. I love it. It's much more inspiring than complaining, and I've been in those situations where I've complained too, and
Of course.
when you put all that out there, it's like, well, someone else has to change. Like you said, it's so disempowering because you can't do anything about it. But in this owning it, when you own your armor, you can do something about it and you can have that positive impact. As you're sharing what teams can do and that how each node can change the whole, I think of Mary Poppins. Like I love when any of those types of stories where somebody comes into a difficult dynamic and as one person starts to change it and see that cascade, it's so much of this owning your armor concept. I love it. I think it really works. And have you seen it really work?
I have seen it really work. I mean, I think about let's talk about that idea of complaining, right? Totally human behavior. And what I want when I work with teams, I say, look, the things we do to protect ourselves are totally reasonable. Reasonable. Right? I totally get it. If someone is driving you nuts, complaining about them is the most natural thing to do. Totally get that. Have tons of empathy for it. But what about its impact? What's the impact of complaining? Let's look at that for a second. I know the impact isn't great. I agree. And let's look at what happens to somebody else when you complain. What do they do? That's totally reasonable also. And then what's the impact of that totally reasonable but armored behavior? And then when people start to see it, they realize, yeah, I don't want this.
I don't want the impact. Yeah.
I
When
don't
you're not
want
getting the impact you want. Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
and I could do something a little differently. I mean, I try not um to call anything like a bad behavior. My favorite phrase is like
Yeah, I saw your
inadvertent.
radar go up. Like, no, I got to jump in on that one. It's not bad
No,
behavior.
it's
Thank you for
it's
clarifying.
it's inadvertent suboptimal behavior. That's what
Inadvertent
it is.
suboptimal
That's what
behavior.
armor
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
right? It's like I don't intend for it to have bad impact on other people. People have good intentions. It just doesn't always land that way.
Yeah. The impact. That's the key. Understand the
Yeah.
impact of what your armor is.
And own it, right? And to be able to say, I recognize that, yes, when I come late routinely to the meeting and people have to wait for me, it has impact. I own that. I have to own that and recognize that even if I have good intentions and I was doing something else that was really important, I still have to own that I have impact. And a culture where people own their impact comfortably without feeling like it's a big deal usually is a place where there's a lot of trust. Like I can talk about my mistakes, I can talk about my bad impact, and people want to be part of something like that.
Yeah, that's an important point. People, you want to be an employer of choice, right? That attracts and retains great people. And this is that's another benefit, yeah, of owning your armor. Wow, Michelle, this has been even more insightful than I thought it would be. I always know you're amazing, and I really appreciate not only you writing this book, but you taking the time today to share it with us. Where can people find the book and find out more about you?
So my website is michellebrody.com, and the book is available currently on Amazon, about to go wide, but you can get it in paperback or Kindle there. And yeah, so
I'm already gifting a copy. I have someone in mind who happens to be having a conflict that this will be very helpful for this person for. So,
it's funny. That was my thought in writing it. I thought, wouldn't it be great? This is another thing a team member can do, is just say, I think we should all read this book. right? And let's talk about what we think, because the way the book is structured, it's almost like an exercise in helping people own their armor. So if you have a difficult person on your team, or you have a team that has some gummed up culture, it's in a way an option to say, let's read this and book club it and then see what we think. And inevitably, it gives people an opportunity. I mean, I'm using it now with some teams that I'm working with. Inevitably, it's like, this is a little different than the way I usually think about things. And
I've already got that.
that was
I'm like, this
that
is
was like,
really different. I love it. It's really insightful. Yeah. Yeah. And this is what we need, Michelle, because we're ready for it. Everybody's tired of doing the same old things and getting the same old impacts. We're just tired, and I think that's what I see in corporate America, are people being worn out. They're
yeah,
because of all the
everybody.
threats or whatever experiences we've had, people are worn out anyway. So we don't have the energy anymore for this kind of conflict. The armor's too heavy to put on. So to have a better option that gets better results, and that upward spiral is absolutely something I feel like we are poised to do. So you are another beautiful and amazing piece of the puzzle, and that big global human puzzle that we all are, creating this beautiful mosaic. And I can't thank you enough. This is really a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate being able to talk to you, Maggie.